to baseball, but it still seems long. So let's say 7.5 seconds. So in the whole game, the foot is in contact with the ball for 7.5 seconds, and you call it football. Does that not strike anyone else as ridiculous? So let's talk about real football, which is what you would call soccer, where the foot is often actually in contact with the ball, which is why we call it football. Although when I'm talking to Americans, I make the concession and say soccer too. Most American sports, it seems to me, are based around the idea of playing catch. I mean, American football is all about playing catch. Basketball is all about playing catch. Even baseball is really one guy, the pitcher, playing catch with the catcher, and one guy with a stick trying to mess it up. It's all based around the game of catch. So you need a real sport like cricket, something sophisticated. I would explain cricket to you, but we don't have the 4 hours that it would take. So, football, real English Premier League soccer football. I used to, when I moved to America in 1997, be a fan of a soccer team, football team in England called Leeds United, which you probably haven't heard of, and there's a good reason for that. Leeds United, when I was growing up, was my favorite team, mostly because I like the color of the strip, which I actually think is the reason most people support sports teams. Because, let's face it, over the course of 20 or 30 years, all the players are going to be different, the coach is probably going to be different, the only thing that stays the same is the strip, right, or the uniform, whatever you call it. So basically, you're supporting the uniform. That's fine. I used to like the way Leeds, their uniform was very nice. But they had a great time in the Premier League. They did really well. They had some very talented players. And then in a fit which is mysterious and confusing to me even today, at the end of that season when they did really well, lots of other teams wanted to buy their best players. So they sold all their best players, got a huge amount of cash, which they needed because they were in financial trouble, and then did not spend the cash on other players. And then they were in the Premier League, then they dropped to the first division, and then I think they dropped to the second division. This was around the time that I moved to America, and when I got here, I realized that the only team that American television showed was actually Manchester United. So I shamelessly switched my allegiance to Manchester United. I was a fan of Leeds United, and I changed to become a fan of Manchester United. But I like to think of myself as a follower, a more devoted and dedicated follower of Manchester United. But last year, under the new manager, David Moyes, they didn't do very well. And this year so far, I don't know what the result was of this weekend. If they've played already, do not tell me the score, because I will have it recorded. But out of the first 3 games, which has a potential of 9 points, they've only got 2 points. And they're not doing very well. And I'm thinking, maybe I am just a fan after all. Because if they keep playing this terribly, I might look for who's playing well and switch allegiance to them. Because you get a sort of buzz when your team wins, so it really doesn't matter. Just pick a winning team. It's more fun, right? Never mind loyalty. I was born there. My grandfather supported them. Never mind all that. You'll feel better if you just pick a winning team. Trust me. So really, I ended up being a fan. And that's really the question that we're going to ask during this series in terms of our relationship with Jesus Christ. Are we fans? We just jump on the bandwagon when it's easy, when the team is winning? Or are we really followers who are prepared to stick in there when the going gets tough? That's going to be the overarching theme of the series. And I realize that with a question like that, it's easy to come across as judgmental. It's easy to sort of look around and start dividing people. There's a good reason why we didn't take this dividing line and put it all the way up the aisle. All these people were feeling smug and self-satisfied, and all you people over here were looking worried. And then next week, everyone's over here. So we didn't extend the line. But it's not meant to be that way. It's meant to be helpful in that it will cause us to ask certain questions. Am I really as devoted a follower as I think I am, or am I really more somewhat of a fan? There's also another danger in this series, which is that you may sit there one week and hear a hard question and think to yourself, I wish so-and-so was here, that's really for them. If you're doing that, trust me, it's for you. And we like to dodge those hard questions. If you've ever sat there and thought this, I really wish so-and-so was here today, they really need to hear this. Yeah, and so do you. So don't dodge that one. So that's really what we're going for. Lemonade stands, hobby or career. Whose kid actually ends up going into the lemonade stand business? I'm surprised that it doesn't happen more. My children last year, there were some other kids in our townhome community in Tampa that decided to have a lemonade stand on a hot day, which is like 364 days of the year in Tampa, a hot and humid day. And they did a lemonade stand, and they were selling lemonade, I think, for about 50 cents. So there's some fairly steady traffic. And my children were very excited because they never sold anything before, and this looked like easy money. And sure, there's a big profit margin in selling lemonade. So imagine that there is a kid who does that, and they get excited about it, and they see other neighborhood kids doing it, and they set one up at the baseball game in the local park and think to themselves, I can make a little bit more than my allowance actually doing this. So the kid tries it out. He gets his dad to make a little sign, and he's got a rickety sort of camping table, and he paints a sign, lemonade, 50 cents. And after one successful day, he does it again and again and again. And then he gets invited to bring his lemonade stand to the middle school baseball game, and he increases the price to $2 a glass. And he sells a lot of lemonade, and pretty soon he's getting invitations to bring his lemonade stand to all sorts of games around town, and he's making a nice profit. But now it's starting to get a bit busier and a lot more professional. It's taking up more time than he originally imagined. He's now got deals going on with lemon wholesalers, and he has to track his orders and expenses on a spreadsheet, so he's becoming very Excel proficient. And what started as a little hobby has now become a time-consuming commitment. And at that moment, this kid has to make a choice. Is this going to become a kind of career? Is he going to hire employees to share the load? What will he choose? And some of you out there are probably thinking, man, I should go into the lemonade business. That profit margin sounds pretty appealing to me. Others are thinking, I wish that was my kid. He just sits and plays video games all day. He doesn't even know what an Excel spreadsheet is. So that sort of motivation and profit motive, that could be useful for my child. But there is a moment when we all have to make a decision. Is this a hobby or is this a career? Is this for fun or is it something more? Am I trying this out or am I fully investing myself in it? And I think those kind of moments aren't unique to the business world. I think a much more common experience lies in the realm of relationships. Watch this video.
Some of you will recognize what those letters stand for. If you're not sure, let me help you out. If you are a young man in a relationship with a young woman, then chances are these letters are not to strike fear to your heart. You may run away from, postpone, you may dread the DTR talk. Some young men will even terminate a relationship if they feel like the DTR talk is imminent. It is that official talk that takes place in every romantic relationship. Do you know what it stands for, DTR? Define the relationship. You sit down and you decide where things are going. Things move from casual to committed. I remember this date I went on in high school. On the very first date, the girl tries to have a DTR talk with me. First date, DTR. I got under a PDQ. I just ran away.
I find this subject of the DTR fascinating. I've only experienced one DTR in my life, and it did not go well. And I have a theory about DTRs, which I'm going to test now. I think most DTRs reveal a mismatch between what one person wants and what the other person wants. So let's just do a quick poll. If you've ever had a DTR where there's been a mismatch between the two parties, would you raise your hand? Okay, if you've ever had a DTR where this person says, this is really what I hope and want for this relationship, and the other person said, that's exactly what I'm hoping and want, would you raise your hand? Yeah, a few of you, but more on the other side. Over the next several weeks, we're going to examine our relationship with Jesus. And I know that for some of you, maybe you're new here this morning, and you think, what is going on here? Is this English guy slamming American sports? That's not a good start. I'm not even going to forgive the accent. That's just confusing. But this is like your first date with this church or with Jesus, and you're like, well, I don't know that I'm ready for a DTR on the first date. That's a bit alarming. That's fine. Take your time. You've got 6 weeks. We'll give you a questionnaire at the end. No, not really. But you're not sure what to make of this. That's okay. You know, it's perfectly fine to sit and listen and observe and think things through. But for many of us in this room, maybe we are ready to have this DTR talk with Jesus. We need to define that relationship to find out really where we stand with Jesus. In Luke 9:23, Jesus said this, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me." So when we look at Christ's invitation, that's a verse which is pretty clear about what may be required. You'll see that on this side, we've got the fan paraphernalia, and on that side, we have a silhouette of Jesus with the following footsteps, and it's no accident that he's actually leading towards a cross. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. And I think for many of you, you will welcome this DTR talk because you're ready to move to a different level of commitment. You're ready to move past the casual and convenient into something more devoted, more committed. So you're ready for this talk. Some of you may not be. You might sort of be of the opinion, I've got a good thing going on here. I kind of like my relationship with Jesus exactly where it is. I mean, he's a nice guy, and I like church, and it gives me something to do on the weekend, and I like to come here and sip a latte from the coffee cart, and everything's comfortable. And this idea of being more committed, of taking it to a different level, maybe that makes you a little anxious. Like, what is he going to demand of us? Are we going to be like making blood oaths and cutting ourselves by the end of the series? No. But what we do want to do is define the relationship. Where do you stand with Jesus Christ? And the format in which we're asking that question is, are you a fan or are you a follower? Now, some of you are wondering why I would even ask that question. The fact that we're here suggests that most of us are followers of Jesus, right? That's why we're here. But don't jump to your answer too quickly. The word fan is defined as an enthusiastic admirer. We're all fans of different things, right? Many of us are sports fans. We watch the games, we cheer on the team. Some of us own jerseys of our favorite players. We understand the concept of being a fan of sports. And the concern is that a church has great potential to simply become a stadium full of fans of Jesus. And Jesus never actually cared about having fans. If you define a fan as an enthusiastic admirer, then Jesus really would say that fans were not important to him. So we can have a tendency to come together once a week and be fans of Jesus. We sit down in our seats, we open up our programs, we applaud at certain times, and we somehow leave thinking that as fans, it was all done for us. We came and we watched the show, and we leave, and we sort of evaluate the service. Do you ever do that? We ever talk about whether you like the songs or whether you like the sermon? Really? Do you really? And we come back and do it again next week. And I get the fact that some of us are really big fans. We've been in this ever since we were children, and we may know all of the songs, and we don't need the page numbers for the Bible. We don't even need the index. If someone says Habakkuk, we're there in a flash. And some of you are saying, that's in the Bible? So there's a variation, but some of us, we're pretty fast, and we're big fans, and being a fan feels pretty good. But Jesus didn't care about having admirers. He didn't care about having fans. So if we'll be honest with ourselves, if we are willing to search our hearts, then we can define our relationship with Jesus. And there are 3 questions for us to answer this morning. The first is this: why are you here? Why are you here? If you read through the Gospels, Jesus at various points in his ministry draws a line in the sand, and he would separate the fans from the followers. We see such an incident happening in John chapter 6. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. So, in this story, Jesus has provided loaves and fishes miraculously for the people, and they're really there for the miracles. They want to see the dramatic, spectacular, miraculous stuff from Jesus. What's your because? Are you here because of the food, which is not bad, or the seats, or the music, or the relationships? For Jesus, he's here because he desires deep relationship with us. And in that passage that I mentioned in John 6, Jesus challenges the fans to a deeper, more intimate relationship with him. And in verse 66, here is what we read. From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. A lot of them went home because Jesus essentially said, let's define the relationship. What do you want? What do I expect from you? And what they wanted was actually not what he was serving up. They wanted the free food and the miraculous and the spectacular. And for Jesus, it was about relationship. And they were disappointed and they left. Why are you here? The second question is this: are you all in? This is the meaning of absolute commitment. A true follower will do whatever it takes to follow Jesus. But the problem is this: we tend to be partial followers, not allowing Jesus access to certain areas. How many of you ever played Clue as a child? Can I see? Which in England is called Cluedo, by the way. I don't know why. But it's called Cluedo in England. You remember the sort of layout of the board, and it was like Miss Scarlet in the library with the candlestick sort of thing. Well, if you use that, picture that in your mind, and you imagine that your life is a house, and you sort of see it like the Clue board, and it's a blueprint of your house, are we keeping certain rooms off limit to Jesus? If your life is a house, are you keeping certain rooms off limit to Jesus? C.S. Lewis has a great comment on this. He says, when we come to Christ, we imagine when we say, Jesus, change me, that he's going to come into our house and rearrange the furniture a little bit and maybe paint the walls a different color. But then we look outside the window and see a wrecking ball and realize that we've drastically misunderstood what's going to happen. Because the reality is there are some areas of your life that Jesus wishes to obliterate and destroy. There's some stuff in there that is so distasteful to Jesus that he wants to destroy it, to leave no trace, to take no prisoners. Are we all in? Are we prepared for that? Or are we partial, allowing partial access, not all areas access? Maybe we say something like this: I'm going to follow Jesus, but I'm going to kind of pick and choose the areas in which I will follow him. So I'll follow Jesus, but don't ask me to forgive that person who hurt me, because I've kind of got used to holding on to that resentment, and it's sort of warm and comforting for me, and it excuses my bad behavior to other people. So don't ask me to give up that resentment and forgive someone. Or I'll follow Jesus, but don't talk to me about money, because I work hard for that money, and it doesn't sound very spiritual. So let's keep Jesus to the spiritual parts of our life, the singing and praying, but let's not have him speak to me about how I spend my money, because it's mine. Or I'll follow Jesus, but don't ask me to abstain from my sexual desires, because that's just natural, and I feel the need to express myself sexually, and I don't really want Jesus to tell me what I can and can't do in the realm of sexuality. So we create this customized Christianity that says, well, I follow Jesus, but only in the areas where I'm comfortable, in the areas that I agree with. I'm a Christian, but I'm not all in. If we are partial, then we are just fans, not followers. The third question this morning: have you made it your own? Is this a personal decision, or have you just gone with the flow of parents, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse? Because that's how it happens for some people. They never really have a genuine faith for themselves, but they go to church because their parents dragged them there, or they go to church because their spouse has been harassing them, and they figure, you know what, for the price of 2 hours on a Sunday morning, if I can get that harassment off my back, I'll pay that price. You know, a happy spouse is worth 2 hours. How many of you would spend 2 hours for a happy spouse? Of course you would. If you wouldn't, you're not yet married. You know what a great deal that would be. But some of us, we sort of become part of it because somebody else is really committed to it. And we get so used to it that we can play along like everyone else. And to any casual observer, we would look like we're just as involved. But do you really believe for yourself? Or do you believe because somebody else believes and you're sort of borrowing or in the shadow of their faith? Because you can come here, get accustomed to it, even sing along with the songs, but in your heart you're really just going through the motions. And you may be really good at going through the motions, and no one might be able to tell, but Jesus knows. It's not real, it's an act, and you've got really good at playing the role. But at some point, it has to become personal. It has to be between you and Jesus when you do some real business with each other. I was brought up in the Catholic Church. I went to a Catholic primary school and went through the First Communion and First Confession and all that sort of thing. But at age 11, I just sort of left that all behind me. I went to a secondary school in England which wasn't Catholic or Christian, and I thought, I'm really sort of done with religion. Now, I studied religion in high school. I was very interested in Buddhism, for example. So I looked at religion as an academic pursuit and thought it was sort of sociologically and anthropologically interesting, but I had no real personal interest. It was just something to study and hopefully get a good grade on. But that got messed up when I met someone who was a real Christian. I played table tennis in a table tennis club. Yes, they do exist. And I met a guy who was a real Christian, and he wasn't weird, and he hadn't checked his brain at the door when he entered a church. He was an intelligent guy. He was a lawyer, and he was just in love with Jesus. And this was so puzzling to me. I was like, what's wrong with you? But he was a very compelling person. He seemed to sort of have this wide-eyed wonder at the world and this joy within him, and it made me curious. So I was willing, because I have that sort of mind, to have various debates with him. So after table tennis, I would go back with John to his mother Enid's house, and we would drink tea, as is the birthright of every Englishman, and we would have discussions. And I would ask all the usual questions that you would think of asking. Why do you Christians think Jesus is the only way? There are so many religions in the world, millions of other people following all these other religions. Why are you so narrow-minded and bigoted to think that Jesus is the only way? And so we talked about that. Or other questions like, how can you talk about a good God when there is so much suffering in the world? If God is all good and God is all powerful, then why would he not sort out all the suffering in the world? Why does he let so many people go through so much hard stuff? And so we would talk about that. And honestly, to some of these things, John had good answers. And to some of them, he said, Glyn, I don't know. You can answer that question like 70%, but the other 30%, you just have to sort of take it on faith and say, from what I know about Jesus, I trust that he is good, and I'm going to take the leap of faith that he will continue to be good. See, we had these great discussions. He eventually invited me to church, which was a little bit daunting for me because I'd only ever known Catholic church. So I went with John to his church, which was not a Catholic church, and the first morning I went in there, I got to the end of the row, and like a good Catholic, I kneeled down to genuflect before the end of the row, and he hauled me back up. So, are you trying to get me killed? Not that I think this church was particularly anti-Catholic, and I'm sure nothing bad would have happened, but this was just what I was used to doing. And we sat down in church, and the singing happened, and I'd never really sang in church before because, all the Latin stuff in the Catholic church, wasn't really interested in singing along with that. But this was like happy songs, and the people were singing along. It was like Christian karaoke. They put the words up for you. All that was missing was the bouncing ball, but I could follow along well enough anyway. And then the pastor, Pastor John Bishop, he looked like a rabbi. He had this big bushy beard, and he said, today, now, I need a little bit of background here. That week, I've been really worried about finances, and my job wasn't going very well, and I wasn't earning very much money, and I was a long way from the Lotus Esprit Turbo that I was hoping one day to have. So I went into church feeling very worried about my financial situation. The pastor got up, and he was preaching through the Sermon on the Mount, and he said, today I'm going to talk about do not worry. And I was like, that's interesting. Lucky guess, pastor. And he went on. And he went on to talk about, you don't need to worry. God knows what you need. He clothes the birds of the field and the lilies. Anyway, one thing led to another. Basically, the gist of it was that God knows what you need, and he will take care of you. All you need to do is focus on his kingdom and his righteousness, and God will provide all your needs. And this was fascinating to me because it lifted my eyes from my earthbound perspective to think, maybe there's more to life than money, fast cars, and fast women. I wasn't very good at getting either of those as it happened, but that's where my focus was, and it made me curious. So I said to John, all right, your pastor was lucky. I'll give him another chance next week, because I'd made a deal with God before I went that first week that he had 4 weeks to convince me that he was real and that he knew me and that he cared about me. Otherwise, I would never go to church again. But I didn't tell John about the deal. So the pastor got lucky week 1. I went back week 2. And that week, I'd had real difficulties in my romantic relationship with my girlfriend of the time, whose name I can't remember, which might have been part of the problem. I think I called her generic girlfriend now. So I was having romantic difficulties in this relationship, and I went into the church, and this time I didn't genuflect, and we sang the songs, and the pastor got up and said, today I'm going to talk about God's guide to relationships. And I looked at John and said, what did you tell him? And then I remembered I hadn't actually told John that I'd be having any difficulties with this girl, so he didn't know. And the pastor went on, and he was just going on and on about this is the way God wants us to lead our relationships. And it was so compelling to me. And I was like, 2 out of 2, lucky pastor. I said, all right, one more week, let's see if he gets it. Well, I guess you could see where this story's going by the fact that I'm standing here today. Week 3 and week 4, right on the nail. And if it had been just me and the pastor in the congregation, well, 1, that would have been weird, but 2, the message would have been just as entirely appropriate. It wasn't like this broad, scattershot sort of message. It was though God said, so, Glyn, you want me to prove myself to you? You want me to show you that I know you, that I care for you, that I love you? here you go. And at the end of week 4, I turned to John. I said, I need to follow Jesus. I said, should I go and talk to the pastor? And John was like beaming all over his silly little face because he knew what a big deal it was, and I didn't know quite what a big deal it was. And I went forward and I said to the pastor, I think I need to follow Jesus. And the pastor led me in a prayer. And so the story began. I was 20 years old. And it was at that moment that it became personal to me, where I realized it doesn't matter what my family believes or what the priest believed or what the pastor believed or what John believed. Now it comes down to me and God. What do I believe? Am I just going to sit on the sidelines, or am I going to get in the game? And so I became a Christian. I got baptized about a year after I became a Christian, which is quite a long time lag, but they weren't quite as hot on the short time span as we would be here. And I would say, even about 2 weeks before my baptism, I was engaging in behaviors, and for the sake of the fact that there are children in the audience, I will not specify what these behaviors were, but I was engaging in behaviors which a good, holy Christian man should not behave in. And as I was about to engage in one of these certain behaviors, 2 weeks before my baptism, I stopped, and I said to the person I was with, I said, I can't do this. I'm going to be baptized. I think that means Jesus wants everything. So I can't do this and call myself a Christian, so I'm sorry, we got to stop. And so we stopped. And then that was a moment of clarity for me where I realized that Jesus didn't just want the religious parts of my life. He didn't just want the part of me that liked to sing a good song on a Sunday morning and listen to an inspiring talk, but he wanted everything. Everything. And I think that's the difference between a fan and a follower. And that's the question we all have to ask ourselves. Have we made it personal? Do I believe because I believe, not because my parents, youth leader, pastor, whoever believes, but do I believe because I believe? And have I given it all over to him? Or are there certain rooms, like on the clue board, where I say, can't go in there, can't go in there, can't go in there? Because if that's the case, then I'm just a fan, and I'm not really a follower. Because Jesus, although I would like to make this easier, Jesus demands everything, absolutely everything. Anyone can come, but everything is required. So there's the question for each of us this morning. Are you a follower or a fan? Has it become real for you personally? Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, I know that for some of us this DTR talk can be a bit threatening, that we're actually quite comfortable with the way things are, and we'd really rather not someone ask us awkward questions and define the relationship. But Jesus, you were not interested in fans or enthusiastic admirers. You wanted people who would give every part of themselves to you. And Lord, there are probably people here this morning who are starting to think, maybe I'm not the follower. Maybe I'm more of a fan, and there's stuff in my life that I haven't really released to you. I haven't given it up, and I know that I need to do that. And if that's you this morning, probably as you heard those things, your heart is beating a little faster, and your face might be getting red, and you know that God is putting his finger on something in your life, and that you need to do business with God about that very thing. So Lord, thank you that you meet us here this morning, not with judgment or condemnation, but with grace. You know us, you know all our stuff, all our sin, and you love us still. There is no sin that we have in our lives that the cross has not dealt with, that grace is insufficient for. Your grace, your forgiveness, your mercy is sufficient for me. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.